I have killed many things. I want to be clear about that before anything else. I am not a creature given to regret, not one who loses sleep over the weight of a life ended. I am Vexathari Nullblade, and for 43 years, I was the most feared name in 14 star systems. Politicians hired me. Warlords hired me. There was once a synthetic intelligence, a machine that had declared itself a god over 3 moons, that hired me to eliminate a rival synthetic intelligence. I did the job in 6 hours. I charged double. I retired 6 years ago to a quiet moon at the edge of the Cathari cluster. I grew a garden. I read. I watched the stars and felt absolutely nothing about them, which is the closest thing to peace a creature like me has ever known. Then the contract arrived. It came in a frequency that only assassins of my tier could receive, encoded in a rotating cipher that changes every 11 seconds. My hands, all 4 of them, were covered in soil when the message chimed. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the fee, and I stopped ignoring it. The file on the target was insultingly thin. Name: Marcus Hale. Species: human. Age: 52. Occupation: logistics coordinator, retired military. Current location: Threshold 9 Colony Station, Outer Rim. Threat assessment: Class 1. Class 1. The lowest rating in the entire classification system. It is the number assigned to targets who pose no physical danger, no tactical risk, and require no special approach. Accountants get Class 1 ratings. Elderly witnesses get Class 1 ratings. I laughed. I actually laughed, which surprised me, because I had not laughed in a very long time. A human, a logistics coordinator, on a rim station that barely appeared on navigational charts. I almost sent a rejection. Almost. But the fee was the kind of number that could purchase a planet with good weather. So I cleaned the soil from my hands, packed a single case, and told myself the trip would at least be a pleasant change of scenery. Before I left, I stopped by my information broker. His name is Duvek, a Plasari with 8 eyes and a nervous disposition that I have always found professionally useful. He keeps his ear close to every information stream in the sector. When I told him the job, all 8 of his eyes went wide at once, which is not a thing I had ever seen happen before. He did not ask questions about the client. He did not ask about the method or the timeline. He just looked at me with every one of those wide eyes and said, very quietly, that he wished I would not take this particular contract. When I asked him why, he opened his mouth, then closed it, then said only this: "Learn about the species first, please, before you do anything." I told him I appreciated the concern and left. I had been doing this job for over 4 decades. I did not need to study a Class 1 target. I was, as it turned out, spectacularly wrong about that. I spent the 2-day journey to Threshold 9, reviewing what little was publicly available on humans. The species was young by galactic standards, barely 2 centuries into interstellar travel. Physically unimpressive. Soft bodies, no natural armor, no venom, no enhanced senses to speak of. Average lifespan roughly 80 years, which in galactic terms is almost comically brief. They had 1 home system and a scattering of colony stations, nothing more. The military records were strange, not because of what they contained, but because of what had been removed. Every significant engagement record was sealed. Every wartime file was locked behind a Galactic Council classification tier I had never personally encountered. A tier reserved, as far as I had known, exclusively for weapons capable of ending civilizations. I noted it. I told myself it was bureaucratic overcaution. I proceeded. Threshold 9 was exactly what I expected. A mid-sized ore processing station with a market district, roughly 4,000 residents, the kind of place where nothing important had ever happened, and nothing important was expected to happen. I docked under a false registry, assumed a disguise, a traveling merchant of modest appearance, and began my scout. I found Marcus Hale within the first day. He was exactly what the file described. A broad-shouldered human male, gray at the temples, moving through the market district with the relaxed ease of someone who had nowhere urgent to be. He was buying vegetables from a Torathi vendor and laughing at something the vendor said. He wore plain clothes. He carried no visible weapons. He moved like a man without a single enemy in the world. I selected a vantage point the following morning. High ground, clean sightline, minimal foot traffic. I have made more difficult shots in worse conditions with inferior equipment. My finger rested on the trigger. Marcus Hale stood 30 meters below, completely still, completely exposed, apparently fascinated by a display of imported fruit. Then, without looking up, without any visible reason, he took one small step to the left. A fuel service cart rolled through the exact space where he had been standing. If he had remained where he was, the edge of the cart would have struck him at head height. He never looked at the cart. He never looked up at me. He just kept examining the fruit, then moved on down the market street as though nothing had happened. I stayed at my vantage point for a long time after he left. The shot had been perfect. The angle had been ideal. There was no logical reason he should have moved at precisely that moment. I told myself it was coincidence. I went back to my ship, and I told myself that, quite firmly, several more times. The next day, I placed a precision toxin in the drink he ordered at a dockside bar. Tasteless, undetectable, fast-acting. I watched from 2 tables away as the bartender set the glass in front of him. Marcus looked at it, then glanced toward the far end of the bar, then called the bartender back, and changed his order to something warm instead. He slid the original drink across the bar to a dock worker sitting next to him, as a casual gesture of friendliness. The dock worker was fine. The toxin required direct consumption to activate. On the 3rd day, I arranged a structural failure in an overhead gantry along his regular walking route. The timing was precise. He would pass beneath it at the calculated moment, and the collapse would appear completely accidental. I watched the feed from a remote sensor. He walked toward it at his usual pace. 4 seconds before the impact point, he stopped, crouched down, and tied the lace on his boot. He stood back up after the gantry had finished falling, looked at it for a moment with mild curiosity, then walked around it. His bootlace, I noted, had not appeared loose from any angle. On the 4th day, I decided to observe him at close range. I moved through a crowded section of the market with my disguise fully in place, a disguise that had fooled council security checkpoints, intelligence officers, and 3 separate species with documented empathic abilities. I was 2 meters from Marcus Hale, moving through the crowd in the same direction, perfectly anonymous. He turned his head and looked directly at me, not in the direction of a sound, not toward a movement, directly at me, through the crowd, at the precise angle required to meet what would have been my eyes. He looked at me for 2 seconds. He smiled. A calm, easy smile, the kind one gives a neighbor, and then he turned back and continued walking. I returned to my ship and sat in the dark for a considerable amount of time. That night, I broke into sealed military archives. It took hours, which was itself humbling, since I had cracked council security systems in minutes on previous occasions. These files had layers I had never encountered, fail-safes built on fail-safes, as though whoever designed them expected someone very determined and very skilled to eventually come looking. What I found inside was not comfortable reading. Humans have an instinct, not a trained skill, not a conscious process, but an ancient biological mechanism buried so deep in their nervous system that the humans themselves are largely unaware it is happening. It detects threat patterns, behavioral anomalies, changes in environmental sound and light, the subtle body language of predators. It evolved over hundreds of thousands of years on a planet where everything in the natural world was trying to eat them. It has never stopped working, even now that they live in space stations and carry communication devices and buy fruit in markets. It does not trigger their conscious mind, it just moves their feet. The warfighting records were worse. Humans fighting in conditions of total strategic disadvantage, outnumbered, out-equipped, cut off from any support, did not surrender, and did not break. There was one engagement record, partially unsealed, describing a human special operations unit stranded on an occupied world. No extraction was coming. No resupply was possible. They survived for 14 months by eating what they could find, moving constantly, and systematically dismantling the occupying command structure from the inside, one quiet action at a time. When a recovery vessel finally reached them, the occupying force had effectively ceased to function as an organization. The sealed files were not classified to protect human secrets from other species. They were classified to prevent the psychological effect their contents produced in other species from spreading too widely. I understood then what Duvek had been trying to tell me. I was still sitting with that understanding when my proximity alarm activated. Something was at my exterior dock hatch. I pulled up the external sensor feed, and I looked at it for a long moment before I believed what I was seeing. Marcus Hale was standing at my hatch door. He was holding 2 cups of something that was producing visible steam. He looked up at the sensor point, which was disguised as hull plating and should have been completely invisible, and he said, in a perfectly conversational tone, that he had not known whether I took milk, so he had brought both options. I let him in. I want to be clear that this was not warmth or hospitality. It was a cold professional assessment. If Marcus Hale had wanted me dead in that moment, the encounter would have begun very differently. He had chosen conversation. That meant conversation was the more dangerous option for him to refuse. We sat across a small table in my ship's forward compartment. I studied everything about him: his heartbeat, his breathing, the placement of his hands, the movement of his eyes. His heart rate was that of a man having a relaxed conversation. His hands were loose and open on the table, but positioned in the specific way that a person positions their hands when they are making a deliberate choice not to reach for something. His eyes were patient in a way that had nothing to do with his age. He told me he had identified me within 6 hours of my arrival at Threshold 9. He told me he had allowed each attempt to proceed because each one taught him something about the method, the timeline, the level of resources behind the contract. He already knew who the client was. He had been waiting for the assassin to arrive, because the assassin was the best source of confirmation he had access to. He did not want to fight me. He wanted to hire me. The contract on Marcus Hale had not been placed by a criminal organization or a political enemy. It had been placed by a coalition inside the Galactic Council itself, senior members from 3 of the oldest species in the galaxy, who had been monitoring humanity's development and had made a decision. Humans were growing too quickly, making too many alliances, learning too much. The coalition intended to stop that growth before it produced a species with genuine galactic influence. Marcus was not a logistics coordinator. He had spent 40 years running a human deep intelligence network, quietly mapping council corruption, building relationships with officials in a dozen systems, and preparing a complete evidence package for public distribution. The coalition had hired the galaxy's most feared assassin, not because Marcus was a difficult target. They had hired me because a human killed by Nullblade would send a message to an entire species. It would tell them, clearly and without ambiguity, that they were not safe, that they could be reached, that they should be afraid. Marcus slid a small drive across the table toward me. He said, with absolute calm, that I could deliver it instead. I thought about the sealed files. I thought about the 14-month operation on an occupied world. I thought about a species that looked at the vast empty dark between stars and decided, apparently without much hesitation, that they would like to go and see what was out there. I thought about the man sitting across from me, who had survived 4 attempts in 3 days by moving his feet at the right moment, and whose response to the galaxy's most feared assassin docking at his station had been to make a warm drink and knock on the door. I have been afraid many times in my career. It is a useful sensation. It sharpens the senses. It focuses the mind. But it had always been fear of capability, fear of what a target could do to me. This was different. This was the fear of fully understanding something for the first time. I asked him what the fee was. He smiled, and told me it was the expression on the council's face. I delivered the drive. It took 11 days of the most demanding work I have ever performed. Not killing, but protecting, routing, moving through council surveillance like water through stone. Using every skill I had built over 43 years, not to end something, but to make sure something reached the light. The coalition collapsed. The evidence spread to every free press organ in 12 systems simultaneously. 3 council members faced tribunal within the month, and what the evidence revealed about humanity's preparation, the alliances quietly built, the contingencies carefully laid, 40 years of patient, careful, invisible work, made the rest of the galaxy very still for a very long time. I did not receive credit. My name vanished from the registries shortly after, scrubbed by parties I made no effort to identify. I went back to my garden. I went back to the quiet moon, and the stillness, and the stars I had trained myself to feel nothing about. But I think about Marcus Hale sometimes. Every species in this galaxy fears humanity, because they are dangerous. That is reasonable. That is accurate. I fear them because they are patient. There is a difference. Most species never learn it.